All right, we're back. Part two with John Bertoli. Um, John, you said you were saying something that you were feeling something. So go ahead and, if you like, go ahead and take it.
Well, after we recorded the last one, my wife came home and she wanted to watch it, Kamiko. And um, what's interesting is uh, you know that she's Vietnamese, and even after all this time, her English is somewhat limited. So she said, can we watch this? And because she had questions and she wanted me to explain things. And so I ended up watching it with her. And what was really interesting is um, we're kind of skimming over certain things because obviously time restraints and so forth. But she said something to me is like, you know, do you think it'd be important if you know you kind of explained, when I was talking about the chakras and I was talking about different types of energy and interpretation, things like that. And she said, do you think it'd be important if I was to explain how I got to the point of understanding these things and then take them and then from there explain how I use them to improve my life and maybe somebody could learn from techniques that I use. And I said, yeah, okay. I thought that was a pretty good idea. So I'm going to back up a little bit and give you kind of a summary as to how I became more spiritually aware and what put me on that path in the first place. So, starting when I was a really little boy, there was a lot of weird things happening to me, right? I would remember, I think I was probably 3, maybe 4 years old, and I was really, really sick. And I remember laying in my bed and I was burning up with a fever. I remember that very distinctly. And there was a woman standing in the doorway, and she had kind of like this old style, like robe on and a thing over, like a scarf type thing over her head. And I remember the energy of that being really, really healing, and I didn't know at the time. I had no idea who it was, but it felt good. And I remember hearing my parents downstairs and they were watching TV, and I thought about that a lot over the years, is who was that? Who was that? And after a lot
Yeah.
of soul searching and through meditation and asking questions within and so forth, I found it to be that it was Mother Mary that had visited me and gave me the energy, or I can't say gave me the energy, but my understanding is she helped me understand that I can heal myself, and that there's more to it. So, fast forward a year or so or whatever, and I was always seeing things out of the corner of my eye, or I was feeling energy and being around people, and I could sometimes actually even hear their thoughts in my head. And I would freak my mother out, get in trouble at school, and the teacher would say something. I go, yeah, but she's thinking this and saying something else, and that teacher. And I remember these experiences vividly, and they would get really, really nervous and things like that. And then another time that is always kind of tied to that is I was riding home on the school bus from kindergarten, which meant I was 5 years old, and coming home at about 11:30. And this was in Williamstown, Massachusetts. It was a sunny day. It was cold out, but it was a sunny day, crystal clear sky. And I remember looking out the window and seeing this triangular metallic craft traveling along in the same direction as the bus. And I remember looking around, and there was nobody there, nobody else that was seeing it. It was just me, and there's probably maybe 6 or 7 kids on the bus at that point, because I was towards the end of the route. And I went to say something, and I remember coming home and telling my mother, and she, oh no, you didn't see that, right? So they, I would always be told that I never, that it was just my imagination. It's just your imagination, right? So as I started to get older, a lot of weird things would happen, and I was just like, it it started to intensify. By the time I was maybe 8 years old, I had two older sisters, and whenever I would say something like that, it was Johnny's lying, Ma, that type of stuff, and I would literally get in trouble and sent to my room for making up stories and lying, right? Which I wasn't, right? And
That's
so
funny.
probably by the time I was 9, yeah, probably 9, under 10 years old, I decided I wasn't going to tell anybody anything anymore, right?
That's how.
And so, yeah, right, because self-preservation. So as I got older and went into my teens, I was still having these. I kept seeing a lot of craft at night. I kept seeing orange orbs, or I would see um, shapes of very faint but kind of apparition type things moving through our house, where they would actually go right through the wall, right? And I could feel this stuff, and I would always hear a woman's voice in my mind very, very clearly, but it was speaking in a language that I couldn't understand, but it felt very, very calming, right? And so as I went on and on, I was driven to have experiences. And I remember around the time I was probably, 8 years old, in Massachusetts, we used to get a lot of snow and blizzards, and during the winter, just before December or around December, it gets dark really, really early, like 4:30, it starts to get dark. So by 6 o'clock, it's really dark out. And I remember being out there as a little kid, and I was playing in the snowbank, digging with my toys, and I felt this presence from behind me that I knew something was looking at me, and it really scared me, right? And I had this vision in my mind that it was a tall, dark, person-shaped thing, but it was really big, right? And basically, and I still have that. I still remember all this stuff, excuse me, very clearly. And it was kind of like, I remember watching that show In Search Of, which was big because I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 1965. And so, early 70s that came on, and there was this In Search of Bigfoot. And I went completely white, and my mother was there. And why? I go, that's what was behind it. Oh, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Right. And so I was always driven to learn more and more about this. And as I got older, I would go see movies about Bigfoot and go see movies about UFOs and ghosts. And I was fascinated with all this stuff, but I couldn't understand why I was fascinated with it. Right. But I knew that there was something there. And as I got older and started to research and started to see that there were people that would actually talk about these things and go to conferences, and they would do these presentations. And it was a really interesting part of my life, because it opened me up to wait, like there are things called the psychic phenomena. There are UFOs. There are, cryptid creatures in this world. There are ghosts. And, a lot of people, believe it or not, once you have your first true experience with that, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel it. It becomes part of your understanding, and you realize that there's so much more than just the physical, right? So we'll fast forward a few years, and I had some pretty profound experiences. Like one time I was at a friend's house, and now I was always looking up in the sky because I wanted to see these things, right? And knowing what I know now, because there's the law of attraction, and a lot of skeptics will say, well, if you go looking for something, you're likely to find it. Well, that's very true, but it's not because I was making something up. It was because my energy was attracted to these certain other energies that are part of our world. They're a very normal part of the world. However, society, it's changing a little bit now. It's becoming a little more mainstream. But back then, you were a nutcase, you were on drugs, you were lying, you were trying to get attention, and all these different excuses, and you were to be ridiculed if you spoke out on any of these subjects, right? So coming home from a friend's house one night, I was driving down this hill, and I would have taken a left to go home, and felt this energy, and I kind of looked up and I saw this orange orb in the sky, and I was like, I'm gonna follow that, right? And that was in where I lived was in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is in the far uppermost left-hand corner of the state of Massachusetts. So 10 minutes into, if you go due west 10 minutes, you're in New York State, or if you go about 3 or 4 minutes north, you're in Vermont. So I followed it, was up it towards, headed north towards Vermont, and I followed it up into New York, up into Vermont, and I turned left and started going into New York State. Before I did that, I stopped at a friend's house and picked him up, and I said, "Hey, there's a craft out here." And we followed that craft out into New York State, and it was amazing. When we got out there, it was pitch black. There was no moon, and it's farm country, so there's no lights, there's no light pollution, and we could see this thing it would power up and get really, really bright and go to white, and then break down and get small and go to red and orange. And it was moving behind the trees and in these ridges. And we watched this thing for probably 45 minutes. And both of us had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. So we said, okay, we got to go. And as we were turning back to go back to Massachusetts, this thing was following us, right? So experiences like that. Then I had experiences in the 80s where I was sitting in my room listening to a record. Yes, we had vinyl back then before cassettes became really, popular or whatever. And I was looking out a second story window, and I saw this red set of lights go by the window. I'm like, there's no roads or anything. What was that, right? And I went out the window, which there was a flat garage roof, and I went up on top, and I saw a triangular craft go by, and it was silent. And there were a couple of these huge pine trees that were in the way, and so I went up onto a higher part of the roof and looked due north, and I saw the lights there. And then I realized, and then another one came out from behind the lights. So I had seen the second one. There were two of them, and they were traveling, right? I later found out that those two were Lockheed TR-3B anti-gravity craft, which has been, you can go on the CIA website and the FBI website, and they talk about these craft, right? They're still not in the mainstream, but a lot of people know about them. But these are U.S. government craft, all right? But so I was seeing things like that, but other things happened during that period of time, and I'd seen those craft many, many times, and lo and behold, I remember waking up and freaking out in the middle of the night where I was engulfed in this red light, and I was floating back through the wall of my bedroom, being put back in my bed, and I completely freaked out. And basically I had been abducted, and it took me years to understand that there were fragmented memories that would come back piece by piece. And I actually, on that craft were 2 Air Force men, but there were also 4 grays, Zeta Reticuli, aliens, extraterrestrials. Now there are a lot of different types of grays. So that really, for the longest time, that made a really profound impact on me. But I would have this, that kind of heightened my, well, call it spiritual, but heightened my telepathic abilities. And everybody has this stuff, whether you embrace it or not. If you don't embrace it, that's cool. If you do, it's like it's a skill. So it gets stronger and stronger, and you're thinking about somebody, and all of a sudden they call, right? Well, hey, I was just thinking about you. Well, you felt that through consciousness, and that is actually telepathy. Now it's low-level telepathy, but telepathy nonetheless. That prompted me to really study all these so-called experts in the world about, psychic phenomena, extraterrestrials, cryptid creatures. And I had a lot of experiences up in the forest where, I'd seen things and felt things, and again, telepathy, right? And it's telepathy to me comes in a series of pictures or flashes of visions. It's not so much like having a conversation. It's like this rapid succession of images, really, really fast, you know, because it's it's at the speed of thought, which is faster than light, right? So I ended up going up to this place, a UFO hotspot and spiritual sanctuary that was owned by a guy named James Gilliland, who I had followed his work for about 15 years. It was called the East Seti Ranch. And I ended up, after about trying to get there for 10 plus years, I ended up going there. And because I have a background in music and live music production, I ended up running the conference center, doing all the sound and video and everything for all the keynote speakers and conferences and all this other stuff, right? And that place is a hot spot. It's at the base of Mount Adams in Washington State. And that whole area is a hot spot, and also for Bigfoot and things like that. And I've had some pretty, you know, crazy experiences with interacting with them. And I'll tell you right now, they're not animals. They're a type of people. They're evolved beyond the need of technology. They are so telepathically capable. They have abilities to shift in and out of this particular reality into others and come back. And I mean, stuff like that. And like other experiences where, you know, there's 140 people out in the field watching, and there's craft coming over and forming into triangles and then moving away and going in every direction. And I'm actually getting the chills talking about that. And every time I really think about that experience, and you know, there was like 60, maybe 70 different craft that night, and there's 140 people seeing this stuff, right? But there's this telepathic connection that happens with these extraterrestrial beings that are piloting the craft, and it's this euphoric. It feels like home. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is I have never, and you've heard me say this too, I've never felt at home anywhere here in this lifetime, anywhere. Nothing is home to me. And I came to understand that my soul is not an earthbound soul. It's from somewhere else. And that's why when I interact with these higher beings that are we talked about the Christ consciousness, you know, fifth dimensional consciousness, how that's home, that level of consciousness. So, you know, through this whole journey and understanding what is our purpose in life? Well, everybody has a divine purpose in it. And through all these experiences, and I've kind of really skimmed over, there's been so many of them, but I skimmed over to kind of give you a pretext of where I'm going with this. But when we know we have a higher purpose than just to be John and be the fitness trainer, that there's way more to my purpose than that. And it took me a long time to understand that, to a tremendous amount of, for lack of a better term, soul searching, which is quite literal. But when I made that connection with my higher selves, my higher aspects, and I realized that the body is very temporary and my true identity is eternal, well, that made me understand that so is everybody else's, right?
Yeah.
And so when we can connect, and one of the jobs within my purpose of being in this body and on the planet at this time is to perhaps help others find their path back to themselves. So people use religion for it. They'll use modalities like yoga and qigong and a plethora of others. But really what we're doing, and I touched on this in the last segment we did, which was we were using weightlifting to practice self-awareness. Now, when we bring our levels of self-awareness to a much higher state, things start to become easier in life and things start to make more sense. So when we go up against like adversity in life, say, there's a tremendous of adversity that is being thrust upon us by this engineered society that we live in. right? You look at, you know, people are being completely bombarded with images of violence, of things that are not, they don't harmonize with the true essence of the divine, right? Like you'll hear things in like the term holy war. Well, that's a complete oxymoron because no war is holy, because war means to kill and maim and destroy. It Unholy war is the accurate term for it, right? You look at like the Crusades from the Vatican, which were against the Arabs and which we called Saracens back then, and Muslims and Jews and all these different religions would fight each other in the name of their God, right? Well, does that make sense? Or the Spanish Inquisition would torture people. How can you be a man of God and do these incredibly cruel things and harm another, right? And I mean stuff like that still goes on, all really throughout the world. But on the level, I mean, on an emotional and a psychological level, there is a very large war going on right now in society, and it's for our souls, right? So when you look at social media, for instance, right? Now, just 10 years ago, there were studies that said, people were seeing as many as 300 to 400 images a day. Now it's in the neighborhood of 12,000 images a day, and a lot of them are you know subconscious images, right? So like when they do subliminal embedding in video and sound, there are something called carrier waves, right, which we can't hear. It's a wave that carries, or a beam or a wave that carries information. It's kind of like the cell phone. When we talk about the cell phone, it's like there are microwaves that go from the cell tower, will actually go from the satellite to the cell tower to your phone and back and bounce all over the world. That's why we can talk wherever. But the carrier wave isn't the actual conversation we're having. It's just carrying the information that we're speaking over the video, right? So we have all this technology that's hammering us, and it's affecting the way we think, and it's affecting very often you know a lot of people are programmed so deeply. It's like the sheep mentality. One goes this way, they all go that way. The joke sheeple. You know, and and if you very often, it's kind of like the old ridicule of somebody who came out and reported seeing a UFO, which they had to change the name. Now it's UAP, right? Everything has to change with the times, right? So when you get so programmed to seeing all these images, you don't realize that there are forces at work that are controlling your mind, or controlling your thought patterns, right? Now, where do the thought patterns reside? They reside in consciousness. Now, how many times have you been just going through your day, and all of a sudden this random thought goes through your mind, and you're like, that's weird. Where'd that come from?
Mhm.
Because what that it wasn't yours, right? Well, as we understand more about the way consciousness works, and that there are beings that are non-physical, that are parasitic, right? So energy is I always go back to a really simple analogy of it. Energy is like a car battery. You have a positive terminal and a negative terminal, right? Well, it won't start the car unless you have both terminals, because that creates the cycle, or the circuit, for the energy to flow and turn the car over and start the car, right? Well, spiritual energy, consciousness, that has polarities too, has ebb and flow, it has push and pull, yin and yang, dark and light, good and evil. all those things, right? And they have to have their counterpart for it to balance, right? And so let's just say it was a beautiful sunny day out and you took a flashlight outside and you shine that flashlight outside. What would you see from the beam? Would you see the beam in that flash? No. But if you took that same flashlight out when it's dark, it illuminates a lot, right? Because it's the contrast of the energies. So when you look at thought as energy, and what are we doing? Are we the thought itself, or are we observing the thought? And this is what I've been thinking over about since the last session that we did, was when we talked about centering and quieting our minds to bring ourselves to a level of focus, right? But what's important is having techniques and tools that enable you to do that. So how many times have we've talked about this a lot too, is how many times have all of us done this to where your mind is racing and it's got so much you can't sleep at night, something's bothering you, and then it starts to really make you sick. Now, why does that happen? Because these energies start to build, because we have the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body, the astral body, and so forth, and it keeps going. But if we're very, very, if we're thinking about thoughts that really upset us, then it's pushing it down into that emotional body. So now you've got that link between the mental body and the emotional body, right? And how does the emotional body integrate into the physical body? It's the nervous system. So the nervous system is actually the wiring of the body, and the muscles and the heartbeat and the breathing and everything. Those are bioelectrical impulses that travel through there, right? So if like a magnet, or here's an even better one. You walk across the carpet, right? And you touch the doorknob, you get zapped, right? That's static electricity, right? Because you have created an electromagnetic field and your body is able to store that energy. Well, it's the same thing with negative thought. It's the same thing with something that's like if you're angry, right? Now, there's a couple mechanisms that happen within that. So if you're angry, your body starts to secrete what's called the stress hormone, cortisol. And cortisol is very acidic. It makes your joints hurt. It makes you sick. It gives you a headache, drains your energy, drops your normal hormone balance and completely disrupts that. It makes you feel like shit, right? So what can we learn from more understanding, and how can this help us in everyday life? Because if this knowledge isn't usable in a practical way, why bother with it? And I used to get into a lot of I don't want to say conflict, but I used to see a lot of these people, these so-called experts. And when I was up at ESETI, I met hundreds of these world-renowned experts, and I use that term very, very loosely because most of them I don't feel really have a grasp on the divine truth of what they find. They get into a niche and they make money there and they stay there. Now let me just pause for a second. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Right? The knowledge is knowing the aspects of it. The wisdom is how to use it, right? So if we can't use what we learn, then we haven't gained the wisdom. You read it in a book, but until you put it into practice and it becomes something that is actually, feasible, and you can actually apply it to make your life better.
I just seen something on that today where they said there's two types of, I guess, not education, but like one is knowing, like you just said, reading something or something, and then the other is procedural, like how to because you've done it. And people will mix I know it because they read it or someone taught them, but they never, actually did it. So, and there's a lot of knowledge and understanding that you could never get from, the first type of knowing. But when you talked about those crafts, and I thought to myself, and I told you about this, that I seen an orange. I thought it was a firework at first. This was like a few days after New Year's or something. So I'm driving. It's like 2 a.m. I had the munchies and I went to Whataburger or something like that. And I'm talking on the phone and I'm driving. There's no one. There's no one on the roads, you know. And I'm driving and I'm talking to a friend, and they're just talking and I'm listening, and I see this bright, you know, it's far, but it's a bright orange, you know, something circle or something, you know. And I'm just thinking, oh wow, you know, like they're popping fireworks, you know. Um, and but that firework, it was going down, and I'm just like, oh cool, you know. And then it just woof, just like comes straight, like not towards me, but in the direction, and much lower, and then just goes woof and just, you know, just disappears, and just, and I'm on the phone and I'm just like, in my mind, I'm not thinking, I'm just like, I didn't say anything.
What did I just see?
Yeah. I'm like, that's not a firework. I don't know any fireworks that do that. But also, I wanted to say, when you said that, you know, these things that you see that you can't unsee. And I believe that not everyone sees these things, and probably most don't.
Correct.
And those people who don't see something and the others see it, people that didn't will try to justify what you thought you seen because they want to justify that you didn't see that. And it's always the ones that can't see. And I you know, that's part of the battle. And one last thing I wanted to mention was how you said, I forgot exactly what you said, but it was basically how people, like, well, things have changed, you know, like you said, back in the day, they'll call you a nutcase. Hell, way further back in the day, they'll burn your body, you know, like
They would.
yeah. And, you know, and times have changed, and things are, you know, things and people are progressing and they're understanding, because you can't unsee the things that they're seeing. And I thought about that when you said that. It reminded me of like some TikTok videos of like you know, not older people, but not children, but you know, middle-aged, upper 30s, 40s, 50-year-old guys making TikToks. And it's a joke. They're making jokes, and they're like, for instance, like maybe manifesting, right, or like trying to meditate, and it's something to do with manifesting and spirituality. And they look real goofy, right? Because you can tell these guys were never like that, and never, but they're like trying it, and then like basically like, am I doing this right? And then he's just like fucking quits, because he looks funny, right? But what that was what's going on is, as you say, the ego mind is discouraging them to actually really do it, but also they're doing it because they know it's real, because they're starting to see it. But they've been so programmed for so many years, their ego mind will not allow them to, you know, to get aligned.
That's exactly where I was going with this, actually. So, doing this right. Well, there is no right or wrong. There is, are you getting, it comes down to intent. Because there's infinite ways of bringing yourself to where you want to be, right? But overcoming that ego mind, understanding what is the ego mind in the first place, right? And if you live in your headspace or that ego mind all the time, and you get in the habit of it controlling, right? Now, ego mind is the mind that will receive passing thoughts, you know, that aren't always yours. They aren't generated from within your aura or your mind, which is, you know, your mind, the actual, you know, divine mind is not localized just to the body, but it's also elsewhere. That's how you can have telepathy and think of another and they call you, because that's connected. That's at a higher level of consciousness. That's not our waking thought. That's above our waking thought. And it's also tied deeply into our subconscious thought, right? So, but when you look at the ego, right, that how do we balance that? How do we overcome that? And that's exactly where I was going with this is going back to the chakras, okay? And what is the balance of the ego mind? That's the heart chakra, okay? So I'll just recap for a second. Crown chakra, antenna, third eye, spiritual vision, throat chakra, ability to receive and express, heart chakra, absolute truth and knowing, sacral or solar plexus, power, using, you can be brought into physical or just power in self and power in peace and quiet as well. Sacral chakra, creative, right, that's behind the belly button, and the root chakra, grounding to the Mother Earth, right, of which we are a part. Our physical bodies are a part, and to a large degree, our consciousness is also anchored down through there, right? So one way to do it, and I used to do this in a lot of the groups that I used to do, is, how do you stop the ego mind from dominating, right? Well, it's all about perspective, right? It's all about awareness and the point of awareness. Now, consciousness is omnipresent. It's everywhere always, right? But it's our awareness and our point of awareness and our perspective that shifts. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so very, very simple little tool that I used to use, okay? I would have everyone go, I want you to bring your awareness to without touching it, to your left earlobe. Take a second and then bring your awareness to where you're very aware of the feeling of that earlobe. And I would pause and everybody there? Okay. Now what I want you to do is I want you to bring it down to the tip of your left pinky. Now shift your awareness to the tip of your left pinky. Okay. Everybody there? Yeah. And everybody would, yeah. Okay. Now let's bring it down to your pinky toe on your right foot. Bring your awareness to there.
That's crazy.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So so it's pretty easy, right? Everybody can do this, right? Very easy. So here's the next step, right? So if we're in our mind, and what's to stop us from bringing our awareness down into a heart chakra using the exact same technique? And so there's something that I do, and I do it every night, and they're called incantations, which is just something that gets repeated, which it's, a lot of people say, or, I am successful, or they'll repeat that over, the Tony Robbins and stuff like that. There's something to be said for those techniques. I'm not going to bash them because you can bring, because it's all about your intent, right? So I do this as when I go into a meditation of any, even if it's a moving meditation, and very often I meditate with my eyes open, which a lot of people don't do. Whatever works, but I meditate with my eyes open because there are reasons that I want to overcome the physical world and understand that I can still be completely present in this physical world, but I'm also completely aware of my higher aspects and my higher consciousness. And so I'll say, I now center my awareness. And it's almost like instead of everything all over the place, it's almost like a zhit right here in front of my vision, okay? And then I'll say, I quiet my ego mind. I quiet my intellect. And all of a sudden, I feel this calmness come over me. Now, sometimes you have to repeat it. And in the beginning, and again, these are skills. It takes practice. Now, I'm not saying you have to do it 4 hours a day, but if you do 5 minutes, 10 minutes of centering yourself and quieting yourself every day, you do that for your mental health, your physical health, you will feel infinitely better. I'm going to back up and do it again. I now center my awareness. And then when I feel it come in, I now quiet my ego mind. And sometimes you'll hear that inner dialogue, right? It's always voices, right? And that goes back to all the stuff that we're being, all these images that are being pumped at us every day, right? Well, if you spend the whole day on your phone, not only are you seeing these images, but there's also frequency that is embedded in the sound and the picture, right? And that goes into, so you're not only are you seeing it through your eyes and feeling it, but your brain has their brain waves. There's alpha waves, beta waves, delta waves, theta waves, and they all correlate to particular mood, right? The best state of theta is the state of peace and quiet, right? Which in turn quiets the body, quiets the nervous system, and brings your hormone balances back. So it's really healthy to bring yourself to these states of quiet. You don't have to do it a lot, but if you want to feel better, you have to do it every day. You brush your teeth every day, right? You take a shower. Why? Because you want to be clean, right? Well, energy can be dirty too, right? So it's kind of like one of those. So once you've quieted your mind, then understand, use that same technique. Okay, I'm going to feel my crown chakra and and when I do that, I always feel the tingling energy on the top of my head. I feel it, it almost, sometimes it's so bad, it feels like I have head lice. It's like, right? And then I'll say, okay, now I'm going to drop my awareness down to my third eye. And all of a sudden, and I'll do something called, what I like to call the soft stare, where my eyes are open and I'm looking dead ahead. And I'm looking at the same spot, but I'm not focusing really hard. I'm focusing really softly. And then all of a sudden, it's my peripheral vision, which is more prevalent than my direct vision. Now, your peripheral vision can see the structure of the energy, which creates matter. So you'll start to see movement and things, and that's why, how many times have you seen something out of the corner of your eye, a movement or whatever, you're looking, it's gone. Because the center, your direct vision, until you're really, really trained to do it, you're not going to see, if that was indeed an entity, just energy moving or so forth, right? But then I'll say, okay, I'll drop it down to my throat chakra, and then I'll drop it down to my heart, and I'm kind of skipping down through these quickly, and I'll drop it down to my solar plexus, and taking a breath or two, now breathing is important. Here's another reason. Breathing, when you breathe in through your nose, all the way, expand, and exhale all the way out and push every little bit of air out, that resets your nervous system. So 1 or 2 good deep breaths per pause, then drops it. So now that I'm down in my solar plexus, and then squeeze it all out, then I'll drop it down, to my sacral and my root. From there, you don't have to go down through everything, but it does align and make it easy. Once you do that, then I'll say, okay, so now I'm going to bring that awareness, which I just practiced and warmed up, like I'm in the gym, I'm warming up. My warm-up sets are bringing, the awareness to the chakras. I'll bring that, say, okay, now I'm going to bring that awareness to my heart chakra, right? And so now when I do that and you're breathing, right, there's the breathing is twofold, because there's another purpose of the breathing. When you're concentrating on that breathing, it gives the ego mind an occupation. It has to monitor the breath. It needs to be doing something. So if it's occupied monitoring the breath, it's quiet and it's easier to focus down into here, right? So now, how does this help you? Okay, how can you apply this to our lives? Okay. All right, you get into an argument with somebody and somebody says something, it really pisses you off, or it hurts your, or hurt your feelings. You thought you were really good, tight friends with somebody, and they said something that was, that was really harmful or whatever, or you got, you're getting, verbally attacked or whatever it may be, right? So now instead of thinking your way through these, you're feeling your way. What is the truth, right? So instead of getting all emotionally charged and responding and getting, like you're, like you have to react, what happens if you don't, right? If somebody, so energy is attracted to its likeness, it's magnetic. Somebody's, if you're in an argument with somebody, and that means us two, the other, because it takes two, right? If we're in an argument with somebody and we just stop being in that frame of mind, you stop it. And then you just drop down from letting this thing take charge, you drop down into your heart. Now all of a sudden you're feeling your way through this rather than thinking your way through it. And I've said this for years, is the best advice that I can give anyone based on the experiences that I've had and the knowledge and the wisdom that I've gained through experiences and experience period, is to feel your way through life rather than think your way through life. Now, I'm not saying don't think, but what I am saying is understand the truth of the matter. So somebody, you're at work with somebody and they snap at you, right? Okay, what, are they really mad at me? Or in essence, is it that person's got something going on in their life and they don't know how to talk about it and they don't know how to deal with it, so they're lashing out. So in essence, they're actually asking you for help on a much, your ego is responding, but the truth behind that ego is, I can't deal with this myself, and I'm going to lash out because I don't know what else to do. But if you understand, wait a minute, that person's having a lot of trouble. And sometimes you can communicate silently with people. And silent communication is one of the strongest forms of communication. It's like, you ever heard the term silence is deafening, right? I have somebody who's going through, I'm going to use an example, somebody who's very, somebody who's very super close to me, going through a messy divorce and getting attacked on a regular basis. And it hurts because after a long marriage, you're tied emotionally to this person. You're tied, like, especially because, and that's another thing that is really important too, is be careful who you're sharing your sexual energy with, because it gets tied in. You're sharing that, and that goes into your emotional body, into your mental body, into your physical body. And there are these links, and they get tied, so they get wound and braided together so tightly, it's very difficult sometimes to break that. Now, how do you break that? If they're attacking you and it's all on a very personal psychological basis, the way to overcome that is to drop down into your heart and understand. If you can step back, and here's another technique that I've learned has helped me tremendously. And just to preface that with, I come from serious abuse as a child. I had PTSD, physical, mental, sexual abuse from my father when I was a really young child. I was enraged a lot of my life into my early adulthood. Difference between anger and rage, blacking out. You get so enraged you don't remember it. You shut down and just, absolute. It's actually pretty amazing I'm still alive. Sitting back and observing yourself, right? So if you had a certain interaction with, you can take it in any and all interaction with anybody, right? What if, you're here and the other person's here, you're having that interaction, but what if you were able to watch the whole interaction from a completely objective viewpoint? You're able to watch yourself and you step back. Oh, you know something? Instead of being so engaged and so close to it, you can't read it. And I use the analogy, a piece of paper. If the piece of paper is right here, so close you can't read it. But if you can pull it, oh, now I see what it says, right? So stepping back and observing yourself in like the third person that's really, that can really help.
No, I was going to touch on what you just said, and I use that's one of my strong points of being able to jump out of myself and see things. And I notice a lot of people can't do that. And so, because they can't do that, they're limited to one perspective. And if there's more than one person involved, then they truly can never know really what's going on. And they will base everything and everyone based on their perspective. And it's a I couldn't explain to them to the people like you probably could on how to do that. I just know I do that, and it's really helpful. But I notice most people can't. But yeah, that's a total. But real quick before you wrap it up, I wanted to ask you one question
Sure.
on previously what you were talking about, as far as energy and focusing it on different chakras or anywhere to the pinky, everything. Because as you were saying it, shift your awareness to your left pinky. I was doing that, and it's at the level of where I'm at as far as with awareness. I'm doing that easily, right? And I'm laughing because you feel it. You're
Because
literally,
it's so easy. Yeah.
yeah. Never ever ever even thought of doing that. Sorry, next door neighbor's baby. But um, what I did want to ask you was like basically that was detailed awareness within the body. And but what I wanted to ask was, and I mentioned it to I've mentioned this to you, but what I have always done, even prior before even uh, elevating my education with energy and everything, spirituality, everything within. Um, what I always do, and I still do, is I wrote it down. I will, especially at the gym or anything that involves deep focus. It could be a physical thing, it could be a mental thing. Like when I'm at the shop and I'm thinking, like, I need to come up with some type of sales idea, or I need to, maybe we're in a tough situation and I need to figure out how do I, um, but what I do is I bring my awareness, but not knowing that's what I'm doing, but I bring like all the energy within my body, as how you were explaining is, well, and you use the word awareness, so I'm assuming that's what I'm doing, and I bring it all and I shift it, and it gets into here, and it gets like real, like almost like a rocket shot, a rocket, a space, what's a what is a NASA, a rocket getting shot into the orbit, and I get it to where it's all here, and I essentially it shoots out, and I what it feels like is I grab all the energy within the room, and I not intentionally, but then I bring it back and I use it, whether it's for my weights or whether it's for to grab it and then try to use those for thoughts and new ideas. And that doing it like that is real intense. It's real intense. It's all the way getting here intense, shooting out intense, grabbing the energy, everything that's there, bringing it back, having it way more, and then utilizing it, whether it's physical or whether it's mental for my thoughts. But then another way that I do it, and I'll just use bench press, where sometimes I'll just it's not intense. Then it's just okay, calm, calm, like all this is calm, and then I bring the awareness to strictly from chest all the way to the fingertips, and I'm calm, and I just press the weight, and I can press them pretty heavy. It seems easier, but it's not intense like the other way around, but all the energy is right there. And but I asked that because I was curious if you could break that down, like what essentially.
Absolutely. That's well. So what you're doing, and when you say you don't mean to do it, there's levels of you that have much higher understanding and comprehension of the ability to draw energy in, right? Because it's all around us. It's called plasma. What's not in physical space is plasma. It's unharnessed energy, right? And that's scientifically proven as well. So what you're able to do when you talk about the intensity of it and everything, you're understanding, maybe even on a subconscious level, but there's understanding regardless, is you're doing it out of through pure raw ability, because that's what it is. Everybody has the ability to do these things. But number one, you need to want to. Number two, you need to, in order to be able to perform that, it's an absolute. There isn't a doubt. And so while you're doing that, you've already controlled your ego mind enough to where you've overridden it,
Oh,
right?
it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah,
not.
because, okay, so because now you're tapping into higher aspects of higher consciousness, called higher thought. Higher thought isn't conscious thought. Higher thought is beyond conscious thought. It's knowing of the profound mechanics of creation itself. All right, so we're getting into very it's you're meditating, right? But you're using that. Remember, we use the analogy of the little old, 84-year-old martial arts guy, little Japanese guy that weighs 110 pounds, and he puts his hand through 2 bricks. Not a scratch on him breaks the bricks. It's the same exact thing that you're doing, but at maybe a different level and a different application, right? So then the calmness too, that's the same too, okay? So it's kind of like a paintbrush, right? You can put a lot of paint on, or you can do something very delicate, with that same paintbrush or that same color. It's the intent behind it. So practicing intent, practicing these techniques, right? And I encourage everyone, if they want to improve their life, start down the path of self-reflection and understanding, and be willing enough to understand and suspend your belief systems that you currently have. Because the belief systems that if you're not getting somewhere in life and you're having problems and you're struggling, you've outgrown the belief systems that you've been using all along. It's time to expand, right? And so I went to everyone I could think of. I talked to all these world-renowned so-called experts, and again, I use that term very loosely, right? Ultimately, where did I find the answers? I found that I already had the answers within me, as does everyone else. The answers to all questions lie within. They're not outside of you. If you're looking for someone to give you the answers to something, you're looking in the wrong direction. Now, I know my purpose, and I know that I can help facilitate somebody, or somebody's journey, and help them learn. But ultimately, they're the ones that are learning themselves. They're the ones that, number one, you need to want to. You need that intent, because if you don't have the intent, no good, not going to happen. Once you determine to have that intent, and you suspend all disbelief and all the people in your ear that all tell you that you can't do things, right? I've been told so many times in my life I can't do things, and I've proven every person wrong, every one. It's like, John, you can't lift that. That's too much for you. No, that's too much for you. Watch, boom, it went. How did you do that? I focused it. I focused. Why? If I was to sit there and walk up to the bar and say, I'm not going to get this, I'm going to hurt my back. I remember being in Iron Gym over there, and I had that squat machine, and I showed you that video when I weighed 184 pounds at the time, and I had 800 pounds on that front squat machine. And this guy goes, "Oh, you're going to fuck your back up there." I looked over at him and said, "Watch this." And I took that energy and I transmuted it into focus and determination. And I envisioned myself having already done it. And not only did I do it, but I did it 10 times. And we can share that video. But that's just basically what it is it's a matter of using, now that's an example of using it for a physical means, but it doesn't have to be physical means. Here's another example, right? You have somebody that is always a freaking dick to you, right? Well, if you meet that energy, what happens? That snowball gets bigger. You meet them with the same energy. But what if you don't? What if you, and my wife is a master at this. What if you smile and wish nothing but good intent on them? I've had it to where these people were foul to me, absolutely foul. And I said, in my mind, I'm going to just envision them using my visualization. I want to just envision them being very, very happy. And for the very first time, the guy's wife came up to me and said, "Hi, John, how are you? It's nice to see you." And she was actually sincere that one time. But point being is we can do this, right? So, we can get much deeper into these things. Um, if somebody wants to talk about a certain question they have about anything we talked about, leave it in the comments, and we'll read the comments. And when we do our last session, we can address those types of things, right? But really, if we break this down to its simplest form, is what is it that you truly want out of life? Do you want to be miserable? That's easy. Yes or no? Do you want to be happy and successful? Yes or no? Okay. Here's the these things are very simple, but not always easy. There's a very big difference between simple and easy, right? Because sometimes we get into the habit of doing things so much that we really have to break that habit through repetition. And sometimes in the beginning, it's very tough to do that. Somebody's overweight and they go eat Whataburger 3 times a day. Well, they're so used to doing that when they don't do that, they feel like they're missing something, right? But as you do it incrementally, you do it a little bit at a time. You don't overwhelm, because that's usually a good way to set yourself up for failure. But if you want to be successful in life, or things are just not going, your life's not terrible, but you'd really like to improve it, or there's things that you would like to change, the first thing to do is have true intent and be honest with yourself and start envisioning things the way you want them. And don't get caught up. If you want to manifest something, don't get caught up in how. The how is always the stumbling block. Well, I don't know how I do that. It's not important for you to understand that, because the universe already knows. God already knows. Creation already knows. Creation knows things. The universe knows things that you can't possibly comprehend, because we're in a human existence, right? But you focus on the outcome that you want, that desired outcome, and you keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it in your mind. And when your ego comes in there and says, well, yeah, but you're never going to have this, or you're never going to have that. Now, start off with something reasonable. Don't say, okay, I'm going to have $72 billion and I'm going to have a Ferrari for every day of the week and things like that. Now, that's a bit much to start with. And I'm not saying that can't happen, because it can, if that's truly what you intend to do, right? But I mean, there's going to be massive sacrifices to get to that level of want. Say you did want a Ferrari, okay? Well, okay, so you need to go find yourself $100,000 to buy one of these things. You probably end up buying a used one, right? So you envision yourself, and then pretty soon now I saved, over a period of time, I saved 10 grand. And then also, a few years later, I saved 60 grand. Now I can put a down payment on this thing. So ultimately, you actually can have the Ferrari, right? But more importantly, it's not so much about material aspects. It's more about the peace and the happiness within yourself, because not all wealth is measured with a decimal point and zeros, and that's really what this whole talk is about, is how do we make life better for ourselves and our loved ones? How do we overcome adversity and negativity that's being projected at us? And we can start to talk about, what fuels a lot of negativity and things like that. We'll do that on the next one. But the truth be known is this, and this is for everyone to listen to. We are divine beings. We are these beautiful creation of God that is brought down, parts of it are brought down into this physical body to create awareness and animate a consciousness within a physical body and have an experience and be the person that you are right now. Now, what you do with that time is completely up to you. And if somebody offends you and you say, I take offense to that, you are willingly grasping onto a negative attack, and you're pulling the blade in and a little farther and twisting it, rather than saying, when they try and stab you, say, no, thank you, and not responding at all, and understanding that there are forces, unseen forces, very much like the microwave oven. You can't see what's cooking your food. You can't see what's making your cell phone work, right? But you know they're there. But there are unseen forces that are motivating that particular person to attack you. Why are they attacking you? Because there's a part of their soul that knows that you have the awareness to ultimately help them. Now, you may not help them right at that moment, but it may be years later even. But you are helping them simply by not engaging in the bullshit, not engaging in the petty little argument, right? Because taking care of yourself is number one. Not being a selfish prick, but taking care of yourself. And by taking care of yourself and leading by example, leading your friends, and I don't mean being a boss or anything, but showing them a way, an easier path, you're going to indirectly help them also, because they're going to say, well, I want to feel like they do, you know. If anybody meets Kamiko, and I mean, with that beautiful smile, and she's 4'9", and she has this power to her, and people are drawn to her, and she counsels half the country of Vietnam. Why are they drawn to her? Because she has this incredible truth, and it's this huge power of peace. And you know, that's what it's all about. And her and I, we share that vision. We share those energies. And that's why I'm even speaking to you on this podcast right now, because in the hopes, if we help one person with this talk, then we've been successful.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be more than one. That's how I see it too. Not in your field or in your expertise, your field of expertise.
Well, I wouldn't even say expertise. It's just really what it is. What am I doing? I'm just sharing my experiences, and if someone can relate to them and gain something, that makes me very happy.
That's success to me. Helping others. It's like giving someone a fish. That whole, that saying. But if you can really teach them, not
teach them how to fish, yeah,
right. Yeah, that's
feed
success.
them once or feed them for life. Yes, and like, it's like we all have different gifts. We all have different abilities. Now, some people choose to go down the dark path, right? And understand that if somebody's going to go down that dark path, that's a very difficult way that they have chosen. But don't try and change somebody. We can only change ourselves. We can help and give advice or things like that, but ultimately, it's only them that can change themselves. It's only us that can change ourselves. So if we offer certain things in this world that with the intent of helping others, well, we're helping ourselves also at the same time, right? So doing this, I mean, these types of talks, they help me too. And because consciousness is omnipresent, by virtue of this conversation, we're pushing this knowledge and this wisdom out into the collective, which everyone has access to if they choose to. Simplify life. Simplify it by, does it feel good in your heart? We all know what is right and what is wrong. We may not always listen to it or act out in that particular way, but deep down in our hearts, heart chakra again, feel, right? Use that little tool of bringing your awareness down in here and feel, was that good for me? Did I harm somebody, right? Number one universal law, do no harm. Do no harm. Don't hurt another in any way, shape, or form. And you will not draw karma to yourself and have bad shit happen to you, because by causing harm, you're calling the darkness down on yourself. If you don't like something that somebody does, you don't have to be indifferent to it. It's okay. It doesn't have to be, fuck them. It can be, okay, cool. But remember, they're choosing a much harder way, a much harder pathway than we are, by simply not engaging. Don't engage with arguments. Don't fight with somebody, because it only causes pain for yourself and others, and it will bring more turmoil and be uncomfortable in your life. So we don't want that, right? And the other thing too is understanding that you are more than just this body. You're more than just Jeremy. I'm more than just John. Where there are aspects of us that are eternal, and we can access that. And again, spirituality. What is spirituality? It doesn't have to be religion. If you reach levels of spirituality through religion, well, that's your chosen path. But spirituality is a higher awareness of the divine truth of your nature as a conscious, sentient being. It's very simple. We can, it doesn't have to be this big complicated thing. Overcoming programmed behavior. Somebody quit smoking. Well, how they quit smoking? Well, they changed their behavior. And if you have something in your life that dominates your life and you're trying to get it out, you take that out, there's going to be a space, whether it be mental, emotional, physical, there's going to be a space. So something needs to replace that space so you don't feel empty in there. Somebody's smoking, well, maybe exercise instead. Or somebody who's a recovering alcoholic, don't put coffee or something else that has addictive qualities into that place to replace one addiction for another. Understand that we are powerful and we can achieve anything, but it really comes down to, I've worked with so many people, in the spiritual side of things, and in physical rehab, injury rehab, or in the gym or whatever, that I want this. Okay, yes, you want it, but do you want it bad enough to do what it takes to achieve it? Or do you want to just kind of always want and not ever achieve those goals? And being honest with ourselves on those levels is difficult at first, right? Simple, back to simple, not always easy. But like anything, if you start to practice it, you do it a little bit at a time, you start to get more and more and more. Like writing your name as a kid, learning how to write your signature. Now, how many times have we written our signature in our life? Hundreds of thousands of times, probably in my case. I'm old. So it's been written so many times that I don't have to look at it, and it comes out pretty much the same every time, because I've done it again and again and again and again. What is that programming? And it's like, if you watch a television, you watch too much on TV, you watch too much on social media, and you don't look at it with the proper, perception, you're going to start to think what they're telling you what to think. That's why they're called television programs, because it's a mind control device. Social media is a mind control and data mining platform, but you don't have to allow it to do that to you. If there's all this political bullshit, and you feel a lot of emotional response from these posts, then you're sucked into that whole thing. Again, ego mind, which is controlling your emotional body. Drop down into the heart again. So practice the awareness of dropping down into the heart, being quiet. I center my awareness. I quiet my ego mind. I bring my awareness to my heart, and I am at peace. End the story.
Well, that's part 2. Pretty sure we're gonna do a part 3. Yeah, we'll just keep further.
As many of these as you would like me to do, I'm more than happy to share. And we don't want to do so many that they get sick of it. People get sick of it. But in the interest of really, I mean, I don't want to go to my grave not sharing things that may help others. And so that's you know that I've always been very happy to share my knowledge and experiences with others for their benefit.
We'll definitely do a part 3, and I'm sure this will evolve into something. Just got to give it life, let it take its own course. But we'll see where this goes, because I know this is the first episode, still doing doing really good for the first 24 hours compared to the other videos. So part 3 will come soon, will be coming soon. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, and we're out.